Hey guys, in this video, I'm going to tell you 10 things you should know about Tank Ruby.
Oh! The wolf is coming!
Number 1. The role of a Tank Ruby. Did you know that there is actually 3 types of tank in Mobile Legends? The first is pure tank. Those tanks mainly focuses on just taking the damage and they are the most toughest tanks in Mobile Legends. Second is what you called the primary tank. Those tanks is a little different from the pure tanks. Primary tanks can be used for a different purposes like crowd control, perfect set, and more. The last one is what you called secondary tanks. They are called secondary tanks because they are used in a different way than a tank's main purpose. These heroes are half tanks. And Ruby is a secondary tank. Most of the secondary tanks is not as tough as pure tanks, so you shouldn't use them in a reckless way. You always have to consider the positioning and timing when your team is ready to fight with you. Especially Ruby that mostly relying on her lifesteal, and since Ruby shouldn't use lifesteal as a tank, then you won't have a second chance to shine when you messed up. So be careful when you use her, especially if you do not have a healer on your team. I am seeing a lot of players who's always being aggressive and fronting for her team, and they ended up either being dead or going back to base. You cannot use Tank Ruby the way you use other tanks since Ruby have her own playstyle. Tank Ruby's playstyle should be a crowd control and a setter. Ruby cannot make a set just as good as Tigreal, Atlas, Kufra and others since her ultimate have a very limited range and can only target enemies that is in her front. So it is most likely that you can only hook 1 to 3 enemies at average, and you can rarely get 4 to 5 enemies in just one hook. So if you messed up in your set and ended up taking a lot of damage, then try to distance yourself. Ruby cannot take a lot of damage even if you build her as a full tank, just always wait for your team and your skills. Number 2, getting attached. We all have that moment when we are not aware that we are overly staying in just one player. It's either with your marksman or with your jungler. And some players is sticking with their jungler too much even in the late game. You no longer have to help your jungler kill jungle monster in the late game, so always try to remember that. Some tanks can help their marksman in the early game so they could farm faster and easier. But this doesn't mean that you will stay with the marksman all the time. You also have to respond with your other team's request, especially when they are about to kill the turtle. Remember that if you guys successfully took the turtle, then the whole team will benefit from it. You are not called as roamer just because you are using roaming item or just because you are not sharing XP and gold from your team. You are a roamer because you always have to roam around the map and don't stick too much in just a single place. Number 3, rotation. Rotation will always depends on how the situation goes, but here's some things you should consider when rotating. First is look where the Lithowanderers is going to spawn at the first minute of the game. If it's going to spawn in the upper side, then you can contest with it, but if it's going to spawn in the bottom side, then you can actually try to take their red buff first and change your own rotation based on it. But this rotation will depends on your jungler if they are going to respond the way you want it. And if you are going to take the enemy's red buff, then make sure you or your team will also take the red buff on your side. Or else you will be the one who will be gap in gold. Second is, always consider which hero your jungler is using. There is a jungler hero that can manage to kill jungle monster even at the early game, but there is also a jungler hero that needs your assistant. In the early game, since they do not have the minimum damage, they need to kill the jungle monster as fast as it should. So if your jungler is someone who needs an assistance, then try to rotate based on how you want it. If your jungler is strong, then you can rotate based on how you can help your gold laner in the early game. Third is, rotate based on where the turtle is going to spawn. If it's going to spawn in the bottom lane, then help your team there to kill the enemy so the hero who's in there can help you kill the turtle, and one less enemy is going to be a big help. Same goes for the top lane if the turtle is going to spawn there. Just always try to notify your team whenever you are going to visit them so they can act accordingly. There are a lot more things that you should consider about rotations, but I cannot teach all of it to you. Most of it will be learned through experience. Try to enhance your decision making by experiencing different situation in every game. Number 4, lack of experience as a Tank Ruby. Some of you might be wondering why, despite of having a huge amount of matches, but you are still quite having a hard time using Ruby as a tank. One possible reason is that you are not used to it and you lack of experience as a Tank Ruby. Having an experience of using Ruby as a fighter and as a burst doesn't mean you will also have an experience for Tank Ruby. Tank Ruby is a little different and it has a different playstyle. so try to use her as much as possible as a tank Ruby. Number 5. Ruby's timing. Ruby's timing is quite important for her, but it is way more important for her as a tank since Ruby as a tank do not have damage nor the power to regenerate as fast as a fighter Ruby. So Ruby as a tank will be more dependent on her crowd control abilities, so you always have to perfect your timing. What I mean is you always have to use your skills in a way that you can cancel the enemy's skills and stop their movement for real. Here's some example how I use my skills perfectly timed. In this video clip, I will be able to stop their skills and movement because of how I used my skills perfectly. Just like what I shown in the video, I am able to cancel Guinevere's skill and cancel Fanny's movement. As you get used to this kind of experience, you will also be able to cancel more enemies and stronger opponents. Just keep on practicing. Number 6. Tank Ruby's build. I know that some of you are using fighter build for Ruby even if you use her as a roamer or tank. Well, this is not actually bad, but it is also not the best thing to do. Why? Because roamer will take a lot of time before they can build their items. The reason why fighter build is not the best for tank Ruby is because it would take a lot of time before you can build your first lifesteal item, and that time, it would be useless since enemy can burst you out. That's why you need to build defensive item as soon as possible, so you can help your team way better. If you want a deeper explanation why I only build defensive item on tank Ruby, then try to watch my past tutorial since I can no longer explain it here as much as I explained in my past tutorial because it would take a lot of time. I will put the link of this tutorial in the description box below, and I will also pin the link in the comment section so be sure to check it out. Number 7. Emblem. Whenever you are using Ruby as a tank, it would be pointless if you build her as a full tank, yet you are using an emblem which is not suited for a tank. Fighter, Marksman and Assassin emblem is not suited for tank Ruby since you no longer need a lifesteal, damage and physical penetration. Just like what I said before, lifesteal without a damage is useless, since the HP that you will get in lifesteal will be based on how much you dealt damage to enemies. The two emblem that I highly recommend is Tank and Support emblem. Tank emblem will help you become tougher, and Support emblem will help you to roam faster. It will also give you some good stats which is suitable for fast roamer. When it comes to talent, Tenacity and Brave Smite is highly recommended. Tenacity will help Ruby tougher, while Brave Smite is good for healing herself, since Ruby won't be able to use her lifesteal effectively, so this is a good substitute for it. When it comes to talent of Support emblem, Focusing Mark, and Pull Yourself Together is highly recommended. Focusing Mark will make Ruby as a support tank, since this can help your team deal more damage to the same enemy that you dealt damage. While Pull Yourself Together will reduce your spawn time and emblem cooldown. This is good if you feel like you are going to die more often. But the main reason you should use this is because of its emblem cooldown reduction. As you may already know, there are a lot of battle spells which has a huge cooldown, so the 15% reduction you will get here is a huge help for you. The best suited battle spell for this for Ruby is Flicker, since Flicker have a 120 seconds cooldown. The 15% of 120 seconds is 18 seconds. So, if you are using this talent means the cooldown of your Flicker will become 102 seconds only. This is a huge help especially if you are the type of Ruby player that always want to make a big set. Number 8. Battle Spell. I know that most of you are using Flicker for Ruby no matter which role you are using, but there is actually more emblem which is suitable for tank Ruby. Example, Vengeance can help you survive even in a ganking situation. This is good against enemies that has a lot of attack speed like Claude, Mia, Moskov and more. Second is Revitalize. Very rare people use this nowadays, but this is actually good for tank Ruby, since her lifesteal is not enough as a tank Ruby. This will help you and your team in many ways. Try to use this if you do not have a healer in your team. Third is Aegis. I don't really quite use this one since I find Vengeance more effective than this one, but this is good to protect you and your team. It might not match my playstyle, but you can try it, we never know, maybe it will fit in your style. Fourth is Petrify. This might be more effective for a fighter and burst Ruby, but it will surely help you even as a tank Ruby. Additional crowd control is always good for Ruby. Smiley Face. And here's two more spell which can be used for tank Ruby, but those two is not as good as the others. But depending on how you use her, this might come in handy. First is Arrival. It can be used to roam faster, and help your team faster. But it is less useful in the late game when all the towers is already destroyed. Second is Flame Shot. I actually use this quite often, because it can be used to push away the enemies, and can also be used to stop and cancel some enemies from casting some skills when my skills is in cooldown. I did not mention all those battle spells for you to stop using Flicker. For me, Flicker is, was, and will always become the best battle spell for Ruby. The reason why I indicated all those spells is for you to broaden your point of view. Since I noticed that almost everyone is using Flicker for Ruby, and failing to see the importance of some spells which can be quite effective in some ways. Number 9. Losing your goal. I know that there was a time when you are too occupied on what's in front of you, like trying to kill enemies without noticing what you really have to do. Example, here, we are too occupied to force to push the towers, but what we really have to do here is that we should take the Lord so it can help us push the towers. Sometimes, we are wasting too much time focusing on what's not important. And because of it, it might lead to your loss, so always try not to lose your goal and focus. As a tank Ruby, you always have the rights to ask your team to take the Lord. Just always try to communicate with your team in a nicest way. Number 10. Getting out of focus. This is similar to number 9, but what I am going to point here is the moment when you are just walking around and don't know what to do. That is the moment of your game that you are getting out of focus. Once you lose your focus, you lose your goal as well. Most of the time, the cause of losing your focus is either your team is toxic, or you are the one who's becoming a toxic, trying to blame your team every time everyone around you is not acting the way you want it. And your plan is not becoming your reality. I must remind you that game is like life. Most of your plans will be ruined and things will happen in the most unexpected way. So always try to be positive and spread your positivity around you.
Hello guys, I am KO. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoy the video, then please like my video and subscribe to my channel. Thank you and see you in our next video.
Sand in your feet, feel the breeze in the summertime, stars in the sky.